Well, welcome everybody. We are going to get started with our presentation. It is, I think, one of the most timely discussions we've ever, I think if we'd planned it as timely as it is, I don't think we would have done it as well. Because today, a lot of you might know that both the Foreign Minister of Mexico and the Secretary of Economy of Mexico are meeting with senior advisors to the Trump administration about the meeting next week with President Peña Nieto and President Trump about the renegotiation of NAFTA. So I think it's a really great privilege to get an academic perspective of what this could have, what impact some of the policies that are being considered and discussed by President Trump and his administration, and the impact it would have to NAFTA and Mexico, and the very strong relationship that U.S Mexico have. So it is my great privilege and pleasure to welcome you to the Tower Center and to welcome a good friend, Dr. Rodolfo Hernandez. One quick announcement. I would also like to the presence of the Vice Consul of Mexico is here, Victor Arriaga. So thank you so much for joining us, Victor. The Mexican Consul General has always been a great supporter of the Tower Center. So Dr. Rodolfo Hernandez is actually the Director of International Partnership Development at UTD, as well as the Senior Advisor for the Center for U.S. Latin American Initiatives. Formerly was the Center for U.S. Mexico Studies. I love how he told me that because they had a sense of how broadening the nature and the institution, they changed just U.S. Mexico to U.S. Latin America. And I love how that's a consideration of looking at the institution broadly and seeing the needs of the university. I really love how he explained that perspective to me. He is a world-renowned. He did his BA in Mexico at the National University of Mexico. He has an MA in Political Studies from Southern Oregon University, an MS in Applied Economics, and a PhD in Political Economy from UTD. He teaches courses in U.S. Mexico Affairs, Contemporary Politics of Mexico, the Mexican Political System, and Mexican Economics. Prior to his position at UTD, he has worked as a researcher at the Latin American Institute of Economics, Social and Communication Studies, the Permanent Conference of Public Parties of Latin America and the Caribbean, and the Secretariat of NAFTA Labor Commission. So he really understands NAFTA really well. He's published in several specialized journals and newspapers, participated in the media. He's well regarded both in the United States but in Mexico as well. So it's really a privilege and pleasure to welcome here to the Tower Center. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Thank you for hosting Southern Methodist University. Thank you to the Tower Center, to the team of the Tower Center, especially Luis Maria del Rosal, Executive Director of this center, and the good timing to be here today. I think since Luisa sent invitation to me, I think it was in the middle of the fall semester. And oh, okay.
I think it's a great, and we have a
microphone right here. Yes, we can. Let's see if that makes a difference. Can you hear me better? See here?
What's going on with our microphone?
I can try a little bit louder. Well, when I received the invitation, I was really thinking in terms of how was going to be the outcome of this electoral process here in the United States. With all the ups and downs at that moment in terms of this debate, U.S.-Mexico, and how Mexico was there as a key topic in the campaigns, in the presidential campaigns. And I guess for the first time in terms of U.S. presidential campaigns, Mexico was there everywhere. In any moment, any conversation. And I think despite the fact of the circumstances and the tone of this debate, Mexico was relevant. Mexico was important in this U.S. process. And I think we need to do an explicit recognition of that distinction of this electoral process with respect to previous U.S. presidential electoral processes. But with that in mind, with the tone of that debate in Mexico, U.S. elections, I would like to share a little bit in terms of the cultural perspective that Mexicans may have right now after all this process in the last few months with this specific outcome of the U.S. Presidential election. Because right now, if we say U.S. in Mexico, from a Mexican perspective, the DNA of Mexicans appears with this historical background, where we start remembering that in the 19th century, more than half of the Mexican territory went away, based on the principles and values of moralism and expansionism of the United States at that moment. But hey, that there is a strong historical memory in Mexico regarding that historical moment, despite the fact it's happened a long time ago. And certainly, the famous phrase from Porfirio Diaz, this dictator, Mexican dictator in the late 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, with his famous phrase that says, Mexico too far away from God and too close from the United States. And that is a constant in terms of the popular culture, in terms of how it's perceived Mexico right now by Mexicans. And not only that, even with the most recent circumstances, we can see that even the Virgin Guadalupe, the most powerful and respected woman in Mexico, even has been there playing a key role for Mexicans. Where Mexicans are praying to this Virgin to really find a way that will enhance the good understanding of President Trump with respect to the circumstances and importance of this U.S. Mexico connection, and requesting that this Virgin will protect all these Mexicans in the United States under the new presidential administration. But also say, some key relevant cultural facts and pieces that sometimes we forget in terms of the routine of this debate, and I really want to put in context the importance of culture in this U.S.-Mexico conversation. Now, my intention is to provide some tools for all of us to have elements to debate and to create together different interpretations and perspectives for what could be the present and the future of U.S. Mexico with the current Trump administration. I will be presenting in this way, in this order, some effects of this U.S. election in the Mexican economy, since certainly the campaigns, some facts, some information pieces about the North American Free Trade Agreement, certainly migration, and including El Muro, the wall, which apparently is going to be announced today formally, the construction of this wall. And also some thoughts, some notes regarding how practical the political class in Mexico should be to be before the new U.S. presidential administration, for the sake of this, of the North America and Mexican interest certainly, versus the popular culture of Mexicans in terms of how they're perceiving right now the United States. And how this may be impacting the Mexican presidential elections, which basically the next Mexican presidential election is going to happen in a few months, in 2018. So, all to say that the current president will be interacting with Mr. Trump for 2 years, and the next Mexican president will be interacting for the next 2 years of the Trump's administration, and for the remaining 4 years of the new U.S. president from 2020 to 2024. And then what I call the strategic approach, what we can do together for the best of this North America, and certainly I will be, I guess, giving some emphasis in terms of the Mexican notes and perspectives in terms of what the political class in Mexico is doing about it. Now, what is important in this debate? Certainly, because we know this reason through the media, there are many elements, there are many speculations, judgments about that. But beyond those speculations, I think we need to remember the high level of dependency between U.S. and Mexico. You may recall that we're sharing a 2,000-mile border and about 350 million legal crossings. They're happening every year between both countries. I'll say the business border in the world. Some of the 80% of the Mexican exports go to the United States. That tells us the high level of the economic dependency between both countries, especially for Mexico. And in terms of culture and society, well, all these Mexicans living here in the United States, but as well, let's remember, all these U.S. individual citizens living in Mexico right now for many reasons. Some of them retiring in Mexico in such beautiful places like Guanajuato, San Miguel Allende, Vallarta, Los Cabos, Cancun, you mentioned. So things are happening at this level, at the individual level, at the citizen level, at the civic level,
despite the fact all this conversation at the highest level in terms of the political groups and leaders. And certainly, for what is a new administration here in the United States, presidential administration, the impact that is really shaping this U.S.-Mexico conversation is still in process. I would say there are some high degrees of speculation because certain decisions are pending. That over time, we'll see what are those decisions, and one of them perhaps will be announced today, the construction of the wall. And in that respect, I would like to present some fundamental effects that are happening right now based on that, based on the new U.S. presidential administration, and in perspective to be ready for debating about the next meeting between Trump and Peña Nieto on January the 31st. So, one of the key pieces right here that was announced a few days ago is the fact that the auto industry, the auto company Ford, is canceled the plans to invest about $1.6 billion, 1.6 billion planned in San Luis Potosí, in effect. Of course, the Mexicans were really surprised. They were a little bit frustrated about it, certainly. And also the fact that has been an impact in the exchange rate between the US dollar and the Mexican currency. At this point, it's almost 22 pesos per $1 US dollar, which as a consequence is going to have an impact in the inflation rate in Mexico, and one of the key variables in reflecting that potential inflation is the Mexican central bank is increasing the interest rates in Mexico. I think increases the interest rates in Mexico like 5 times during the year 2016. And certainly the forecast for Mexico in terms of the GDP growth for 2017 went down. About from 2.3% to 1.4%. So, all to say, if there are some radical the economic decisions, and particularly in terms of NAFTA between US and Mexico, this is going to have a major impact in Mexico, by all means, to the point that we may create some scenarios that Mexico will be facing a situation of recession as a consequence. I'm not saying that that is going to happen, but it could be one of those scenarios. Now, NAFTA. I think there's a consensus with relative debate and with the corresponding degrees of polemic degrees, I would put it in a way, that NAFTA, after all, has been a good thing for North America. Since 1994, January the 1st, 1994, that was the day in which NAFTA was the beginning of its implementation. The growth, basically, of trade between these 3 members of NAFTA, Canada, US, and Mexico, grew from $290 billion in 1993 to $1.1 trillion in 2016. So it grew, economic growth, North American economic growth 4 times. This is a major fact in terms of the important relevance and significance of NAFTA for the 3 countries. Just to give you a sense, in the borders, every minute they're crossing $2 million in terms of goods and services. Every minute. The U.S. jobs depending on trade to Mexico, there are about 1 million explicit jobs related to trade, plus 1 million people, 1 million jobs, plus their families. If we add the people who depend on the consumption of these 1 million jobs, people, plus their families, we're talking about 8 million jobs in the United States that are related to the trade between US and Mexico. That's a major piece, major fact in terms of this trade connection US-Mexico. And let's remember that at this point it's not about who is doing what. This is a notion of supply chain management, where one piece is made here in the US but goes to Mexico to be assembled, to be manufactured, and then returned to the US as a final product. So, as a matter of fact, the supply chain integration is about 40% of the value of imports from Mexico and about 25% from Canada. And that proportion is made actually in the United States. So, it's no linear process. That shows the sophistication of what implies trade, NAFTA for the three countries, and the relevance for the solid economic growth among the three countries. Among all the states in the United States, among all of these members of the U.S. Federation, who is the winner? We know it. It's Texas. It's Texas, followed by California. Facts, data is there. And I think it's where we together as a community we need to be thinking in that direction for what implications may have if we're doing or pursuing change in terms of trade for the Texas economy. Certainly, the intention is that we are going to be renegotiating NAFTA. I agree with that. After more than 20 years implementing NAFTA, I really think it's time to review, to refresh what we're doing, what is happening, and what else we can be doing together. I would say, for instance, intellectual rights. That's, I think, something that has to be addressed, that has to be present in this conversation and this renegotiation. New sectors. Energy, for instance. Energy is a strategic sector for what is the future of North America, and should be there in that process of reviewing the North American Free Trade Agreement. But at the same time, if for some reason there is unilateral change, and specifically thinking that U.S. may increase the tariffs with respect to Mexican trade, for instance, I think it's also an invitation for us to be thinking about the future of Texas. Because the Texas economy may have quite good dependency of this trade, and for us to be thinking about how to diversify the Texas economic portfolio for activities that go beyond trade-related activities. If we have unilateral high tariffs as well, may anticipate that we'll have higher prices of products and services in North America, for instance. And in the case of Mexico, the key industries that may be affected with all these unilateral high tariffs will be the booming industry of aerospace industry, certainly the traditional auto industry, and the food industry. And could be the case that that may create more immigration between Mexico and the United States. As well as is the case for Texas, the opportunity to diversify its portfolio of exports and imports, I think in the same way, Mexico and Canada may see that opportunity. And I think has been mentioned for some of the ministers of Mexico to really see all their free trade agreement that already have in place to really review those opportunities and to find ways that they can diversify that portfolio. And specifically in the case of Mexico, we'll be looking for Central America and from South America. And for those Asian countries, certainly that's also a good opportunity for them. Mexico has a great relationship with China, and the Chinese investment in Mexico is there already. As well, the Korean and the Japanese investment, direct investment in Mexico. Now, some notes about migration. It has been saying that Trump wants to send back to Mexico all these individuals who are here in the United States with illegal documents, about 11 million immigrants. It's a good intention, perhaps, from his perspective, but between the statement and the action, I think it could be a good challenging process to accomplish. Just to let you know that to remember together that during the President Obama's administration, there were about 175,000 Mexicans were sent back to Mexico per year. That the highest number of deportations in U.S. Mexico history. So to accomplish a higher number of deportations for what has been accomplished by the administration of Obama is going to be challenging for the current administration. So, in other words, the homework already has been done. And now, let's assume that we'll focus on those ones, only the ones that had committed some high-risk crime. So we're talking about only 300,000 immigrants. The challenge is to find them, where they are. And so, okay, ready for them to be deported. The other piece is to remember one of the beauties of the United States in terms of politics and in terms of democracy is the institution of the federation. You know, the states, they have high degree of independence to implement federal government to federal statutes, including immigration. So, in other words, the state may have some discretion to protect certain individuals that may be fundamental for the local economies from these actions coming from the executive of this federal government. Nevertheless, that topic is really popular in the United States. Really, I think, in general, the public wants to see some action related to illegal immigration. So the expectation certainly is that the pensions will become much stricter. Yeah, why not? And also, I'm really welcoming the second consideration that Mr. Trump is doing for Dreamers and DACA. These are the individuals, the students, the children that came with their parents when they were very little, 4 or 5 years. They didn't have any choice but just to follow their parents, and they came to the United States. And basically, they have been growing here in the United States, speaking the language, being educated by the U.S. educational institutions, and under the principles of allowing them, these individuals, to remain in the United States. President Obama really provided this executive order to protect these individuals to remain in the United States, to have access to higher education, and to be able to be working legally here in the United States. I know that Mr. Trump is having second considerations to protect this group through his administration. But again, we'll see what happens and what is the final position with respect to that specific group. Now, what means for Mexico if the immigration topic is going to be a fundamental priority in the Trump administration? I think Mexico should be ready to be more committed for what is happening between Central America and the United States, because many of these Central Americans are crossing the Mexican territory to come to the United States. If that's the case, I think Mexico should be ready to reach a higher level of commitment to control that flow of illegal immigrants from Central America. But as well for the United States, if the U.S. is not really becoming a destination for these individuals, and especially for the talent of these individuals, especially for the labor market in the United States, well, maybe a significant loss in terms of labor supply, and especially for certain sectors like the agricultural sector, which is facing right now a shortage of labor. That will be affected and may have some implications for increasing some prices coming from the agricultural sector.
And guess what?
Now guess what? El muro, the wall. All right. This was from the La Jornada, one of the main newspapers in Mexico, and that was published a few days ago. And I think really it reflects what is the position. All right. The debate is not about building the wall anymore. It's about who is going to pay for the wall and how we are going to pay for the wall. All right. And here we have very, very explicit position as of today. I'm going to build it. I'm not paying for it. But, hey, that's why we're getting together and having this conversation. I have to mention that from the 2,000 miles between U.S. Mexico, the border, about 650 miles already have some kind of fencing, all right? If he wants to build a wall, he states that will cost about $12 billion. But once you see the analysis, you review, and the expert really factored everything, it's about $25 billion. All right. Now, there are several speculation about how it's going to be paid, the wall. One intention has been mentioned is that through the remittances from these Mexicans living here in the United States with no immigration documents, sending money to Mexico. That will be basically captured, and then with that will be paid the wall. That's controversial, certainly. Just to mention, in the same level, if the wall costs $24 billion, according to the experts, that's the amount that Mexicans are annually sending to Mexico, $24 billion. So, all to say that there are resources somewhere, certainly, and the importance and significance of these remittances for those Mexican communities sending these resources for them. Those remittances makes a difference for many of these families, the difference between the line of poverty and middle class. So, if for some reason this is constrained or is captured by other means, that may create a higher level of poverty in Mexico, that as a consequence may create a higher level of immigration from Mexico to the United States. So there are some implications and there is some sophistication for the way it may be impacting those decisions. Now, but also, let's think about the Mexican creativity, the Mexican culture. If for some reason that is constrained, hey, we'll find a way. There's always a third party. There is always a way to go around and to ensure that they will be sending those resources to home. My personal concern will be more in terms of environment and the culture, especially in the border for those millions that are crossing the border every day. In terms of political pragmatism versus popular culture, I really want to be very effective, very efficient in terms of what I'm saying right here. In terms of pragmatism, the position of the Mexican political class is to really have an equal conversation with the United States. I'm not a little brother anymore. I'm equal. Yeah. So if you want to be negotiating NAFTA, hey, we need to be giving up, but we have to win something else. All right. So the pure notion of negotiating NAFTA may become a more complex process where issues of security, for instance, are going to be in place, creating a more sophisticated debate and conversation between the parties. That complexity may create or may add time in the whole process of the renegotiation. The other piece is that has been saying that the new Foreign Affairs Minister in Mexico, Videgaray, has this direct access with the more intimate group of Trump. But I really think that that's not sufficient. I think that the Mexican position should be holistic through all the levels of the U.S. society, but especially with the groups of Mexican origin living here in the United States, about 25 million. So the Mexican political class may have a very pragmatic approach to be able to be there in that process, in that negotiation. But in terms of the popular sentiment regarding U.S. and specifically regarding Trump, they are not happy with Trump, certainly. Mexicans are not happy with Trump. And a key reference for Mexicans right now is the high popularity that Obama has in Mexico. So for them, they have immediate memory reference to who was there before, who was there after. Now, very quickly, in terms of the 2018 presidential elections, I think so far the surveys is telling us, some surveys they're telling us that Manuel López Obrador, who is in the Mexican political spectrum, he's on the left side, on the left spectrum of the political portfolio. He may be the one that could be elected in the next 2018 presidential election. Okay, I had my doubts about it, and I will explain why. When Trump was invited to Mexico by Peña Nieto as a candidate for the presidency of Mexico, that created a lot of noise in the Mexican culture, in Mexican people. And political party from the right wing of the political spectrum, the National Action Party, was the one really criticizing that visit. I mean, the higher level, much more than somebody like López Obrador. By tradition, López Obrador has been demonstrated a more nationalistic approach and debate. So we may assume that a person like López Obrador may be more pro-Mexico, protecting the interests of Mexicans. But ultimately, López Obrador in practice has been conservative about criticizing the United States. And I think he really wants to be a candidate for 2018. He may be conservative and really being careful in terms of what he's saying and how he's saying anything related to the Trump administration. Ultimately, Mexicans will be voting for somebody that is going to be interacting with Trump for 2 years. And with a high degree of uncertainty that the current change of the presidential administration here in the United States is creating in Mexico, I think Mexicans may be voting for somebody that will sustain certainty or will enhance certainty within that uncertainty in the region. And if that's the case, López Obrador may not be the one to be really winning the election. It could be more somebody from the PAN or from the PRI, the current political party in the presidential administration, the revolutionary institutional party. And 5 more minutes, just to finish, is I'm presenting what I will call the strategic approach, all right? And this is my subjective piece, 2 cents, in terms of what we should be doing in Mexico and here in the United States, and more in Mexico, I would say. Well, first of all, Latin America in general may not be a priority for the United States. I think in terms of geopolitics, it's going to be more about the specific border and Asia, and certainly Middle East. So if that's the case, I think Mexico has to be very proactive to be strategic enough to remain as a strategic partner, fundamental partner with the United States. So if that's the case, I was mentioning to some of my colleagues here before we started the presentation, that if that's the case, I was establishing these lines where some strategic change at the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs should be in place. But those changes are actually, they were announced last night. Basically, they're saying, if we are not really happy with the NAFTA negotiation, for instance, we are going to be away from this negotiation. In other words, we are going to say no to NAFTA.
Who said that?
The Mexican government.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So it's sending a very, very subjective message to the current administration of Trump for them to be ready for this equal conversation on January 31st. And of course, in the best interest of Mexico, that will be the last scenario. I mean, it's obvious the dependency and the growth and the benefit of NAFTA for Mexico. But I think there are some principles in terms of attitude and honor and many other aspects in terms of dignity for having this conversation and to be brave enough as a country, as identity, to diversify Mexican economy with respect to other trades with other countries, and certainly as an opportunity to recreate Mexico internationally and building new bridges of trade and collaboration with other countries around the world. That implies as well more commitment for Mexico to develop a very effective infrastructure in Mexico. Certainly there is a very good infrastructure in Mexico, but I think more to be done in terms of ports, building ports. What about, we have a good proportion of Mexican workers working in the informal economy to move them from the informal economy to the formal economy. And also, I will invite Mexican officers to be thinking about science and technology. I think Mexico needs to invest in science and technology. It's going to be a long-term investment with partial results in the for tomorrow and a week from now. But in the long run, I think that's the approach to really find a way that science and technology becomes a key piece, fundamental piece in Mexican economic science technological development. In that respect, I think that there are two examples that now are happening in partnership with the United States, by the way, and in partnership specifically with the state of Texas. The creation of Context. This is a partnership that was basically created last year between UT System and the Mexican Council of Science and Technology. This is a Mexican National Science Foundation. So through this partnership, we are going to be co-sponsoring Mexicans and Texas individuals for them to engage in collaborations in science and technology, mainly. That's the intentionality I think we have to be doing together, investing in education. Besides, the more exposed we are to this common language of science and technology, to more exposed to the terms of the specifics of local culture, the more more tools we'll have to enhance good and respectful understanding within each other. And certainly, Mexico should start looking around. Mexico start looking around in the European Union, Central America, and South America. Ultimately, Mexico will be more independent, economically speaking. The high degree of dependency between both countries may be reduced, and Mexico eventually will be presented as a more equalitarian level in terms of this neighbor, U.S. Also, I think Mexico has to address the mutual priorities between both countries to really see that this should be and continue being a good, solid partnership. We had mentioned about all the Central Americans coming to the Mexican territory on the way to the United States. Mexico could be more committed to be controlling this flow of immigrants. And certainly, the renegotiation after, let's not be afraid about it. Let's talk. After 20 years, it's a relationship, it's a marriage. So it's time after 20 years. And including new sectors, I mentioned energy, digital commerce. I would say, and I would be pro-education. Let's include education in this NAFTA, please. In this review of NAFTA. And let's strengthen what is really working. For instance, do you know that we have U.S. customs in Mexican territory? So products that are manufactured in Mexico, they can be cleared by U.S. customs in Mexican territory, so they can go straight crossing the border. That has been very effective, for instance, give an example that many good things are happening between both countries. Let's not ignore tourism. Mexico is I would say, number one for U.S. tourism. It's a great destination. And by being exposed to the culture, to the people, to all the elements that implies a complete experience, relaxing experience in a destination like San Miguel Allende, Puerto Vallarta, Los Cabos, etc., Mexico City, that enhances the likelihood for the good and respectful understanding. Certainly, we need to be talking about drugs. That's a bilateral, common challenge, and together we have to be thinking a strategic, realistic way to be facing those circumstances, and especially when we have a high incidence of tragedies in Mexico regarding the America's war on drugs. And certainly communication. By the fact that President Peña Nieto is coming here to Washington, D.C. and speaking with Trump, that's a great sign. The outcome, we don't know yet. But I think we need to be intentional about communication throughout all the levels of the Mexican society and the U.S. society, including civic groups, for instance. So far, the position of Peña Nieto was announced 2 days ago for this specific meeting. Basically, he's against the construction of the wall. He basically is pro to maintain free flow of remittances, so don't deal with that. Protection of U.S. investments in Mexico, coordination of repatriations, if applicable, and requesting U.S. commitment to work against illegal traffic of arms weapons, and illicit money, laundering. He's coming with those key pieces to the table, to the negotiation. In terms of principles, basically he's bringing back some of the key basic principles of Mexican foreign policy, but it's basically sovereignty, meaning nationalism, mutual respect of the law, constructive vision, integration of North America, a continuation of this integration of North America, and integral negotiation. So it's not only about trade. It's not going to be about the whole enchilada. Yeah? And that is going to bring the sophistication and complexity, and may request that whole negotiation more time and between what is this statement and what is going to really happen. And remember, all the interest groups are behind NAFTA. U.S. interest groups. I would call one of them the agricultural sector, for instance. Do you know that Mexico is importing U.S. corn? Corn, maize is fundamental for the Mexican diet. Tortillas, tacos, burritos. But hey, it's coming from the United States. And if this is impacting, if the high tariffs for this specific program, agricultural sector, that may be impacting that group. And that group already sent a letter to President Trump indicating that will be devastating effects for this specific product in the agricultural sector if something happens, if high tariffs will go up. And also, let's be co-responsible. Mexico has some pending reforms, structural reforms. One of them is to enhance the state of law in Mexico. To deal with corruption, we need to do more about it. Impunity, certainly. And the labor reform, all right? I really think that during the Trump's presidency, Mexico is going to be observed in more detail. And the issue of public sector corruption will be highlighted if the occasion arises. If the opportunities, if necessary, I'm sure the U.S. will be highlighting that situation. So I think Mexico should be proactive and also be presenting that key piece in terms of the whole negotiation to be intentional about doing something to overcome corruption, impunity in Mexico. And also, let's not forget, this is happening, the U.S. Mexico reality and routine is happening at the individual level. You, myself, and all those invisible heroes that are around helping us in this routine, from in universities, in taking care of gardens, or cleaning, or chefs, or mention. And as well for the U.S., living in the United States, having great retirements down there, and impacting and changing even values in certain communities in Mexico. San Miguel Allende is a great example. Great magical Mexican community, but it's full of U.S., having great time and impacting, educating the locals with their principles and values. It's a great example of the good and respectful understanding between communities. How would be one day in the U.S. with no Mexicans? What would be one day with no Mexicans in Texas? Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Rodolfo. If you want to, typically our speakers take a seat and we have a very open dialogue and conversation. I'll pick out if you could raise your hand for questions. I take the prerogative of asking the first question. You touched a little bit upon what would happen if the economic impacts for Mexico, if NAFTA would be completely taken away, if we walked away from NAFTA, if a recession were to hit, the shift of economic balance in Mexico, we would see an increase in immigration flows. Is that something that Mexico should bring to the conversation when they come and speak to the team and President Trump? Is it something that they should talk about, a national security? I mean, when the border is such a big topic, should they be saying, well, if you care about the border so much, our economic security should be something you take into, should they play that card?
Anybody would like to help right here? I'll be happy to share my thoughts. but I will start. I really think that Mexican officers are coming for a very holistic approach. It's not only about the linear perspective of what could be this, let's say, trade negotiation. I really think it has to be a complete approach with all the implications and consequences of any decision. And a key variable, I think, is very well said, is immigration, which is really becoming one of the key priorities in all these, not only the campaigns, but as well in terms of how the new presidential administration is perceived and projected to the public. And that issue has to be elaborated as well. But we cannot really separate trade from immigration from is a complete sophisticated agenda, U.S. Mexico. And I think that is the approach that the Mexican officers, governmental officers, are bringing to the table. Yes.
Please, Victor.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa, for hosting this presentation. And I mean, we had a similar dialogue at UTD at the end of November, Rodolfo, you might remember. We were talking about the Mexican reaction to the transition of the transitional period. And there, I mean, Rodolfo was kind enough to invite the Consulate General of Mexico to present the views of the Mexican government regarding the transition issue. And I think it was a very constructive dialogue. And now that we're sitting here at the SMU, now we have a new government in place and we have official reactions of the Mexican government. And I'm not coming here on my individual capacity. I'm here representing the position, the views of my government and my consulate. And we welcome this kind of dialogue. We welcome this kind of interaction because clearly what Dr. Hernandez has presented here is a view where we can see the complexity of the relations between Mexico and the United States and how this apparent asymmetry affects both sides of the border. So, I mean, there's no winners or losers. Mm-hmm. Clearly, there's winners on both sides, or there's going to be losers on both sides. So, based on this, I think, I mean, the presentation by Dr. Hernandez has been very, very insightful because it has pointed out the major changes we have had in the Mexican government once we're facing the new administration. For one thing, I mean, we had a change of the foreign affairs leadership. We had not only had a change of minister, but we have a new ambassador who has been appointed to the U.S. And this ambassador clearly, once he's ratified, will be playing a key role in negotiations with the U.S. This ambassador, I must say, I mean, has a very long experience in negotiating with the U.S. He was under Secretary for North American Affairs, and he headed the North American Development Bank in San Antonio. So clearly, I mean, this is an ambassador who knows the sophistication of and the complexities of the U.S. Mexico relation. And we have a new Vice Minister for North American Affairs. So we're preparing, for this new stage of U.S. Mexico relations. We know that changes are coming, and we're preparing the team that's going to negotiate with the U.S. And on the other hand, and I think that Dr. Hernandez was very insightful as well by sharing with you the major policy statements that the Mexican government has had in the past weeks regarding U.S.-Mexico relations. Mm-hmm. And here, I mean, I would want to stress that as a guiding principle, one of them, and I mean, there's no doubt, we're committed to North America. We're committed to the idea of North America. We're committed to the idea of free trade in North America. But obviously, I mean, we have options in other regions, and we have very good free trade agreements with other regions, which to a certain extent have not been taken advantage fully. And also, regarding your comment, Lisa, the issue of migration, we have also clearly stated that our negotiations with the U.S. at this stage are going to be a package negotiation. It's not going to be an item by item. It's not going to be an isolated issue that's going to be negotiated. But I mean, clearly, we want to talk about trade. There are issues in the North American Free Trade Agreement that need to be revised, that need to be revisited. I mean, there's the issue of e-commerce. There's the issue of telecommunications. There's the issue of energy that was not included in NAFTA. So if we want to open and modernize NAFTA, we talk about modernizing. The U.S. talks about renegotiation. I'm sure we'll find a concept that satisfies both parts. But we have to talk about many things. We have to talk about security. We have to talk about the flow of arms. We have to talk about the flow of drugs in our region. So, I mean, there are many things we're open to talk about. And there are many things that are not only important for us, they're also important for the U.S. So that's one of the principles, I mean, that's clearly being laid out. I mean, it has to be a package negotiation if we're going to open up NAFTA. And if not, I mean, the Minister of Trade and the Minister of Foreign Affairs stated it clearly. I mean, we can always look at other options as well. And we think that, I mean, and this is an invitation both to UTD and SNU. I mean, the consulate is more than willing to continue this kind of conversations. We think it's important that in Texas and in Dallas, which clearly knows the relevance of Mexico and the impact of Mexican trade and Mexican presence here. I mean, we have to continue this dialogue because, I mean, there are many misconceptions in the press and there's many, biased visions in the press. And I think, I mean, clearly Mexican public opinion in the recent 20 years has shifted majorly from a clearly isolated and nationalistic view to a more open view. I mean, there's the survey that's been conducted for the past 10 years in Mexican public opinion regarding foreign affairs and foreign policy issues where, I mean, the views on the U.S. have changed and they're very positive. So we have to take advantage of that fact. Otherwise, I mean, we would, be remiss and not taking the opportunity to address important issues. So thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Rodolfo.
Thank you, Victor. Dr. Takajuchi, and then Anna, I think you had a question, and then I'll start with Victor.
Yeah, well, I recently commented on the Trump's attack on Toyota's opening new factory in Mexico, and then I said that if Toyota opens a new factory in Mexico, then it will actually increase the high-skilled jobs of the parts producers in the United States. And then apparently Trump doesn't understand that the complexity of the trade based on the global value chains. But my question is, it seems that the Trump's policy overall is about NAFTA renegotiation, immigration, and the war that you mentioned are not just against Mexico, but also against Texas interests. My question is there any way for the Texas state government to resist against those policies if they are implemented and then those policies are against Texas interests?
Well, I think that this is a question for all of us. We're living in Texas.
We're living in Texas. But I will say that let's remember that one of the beauties of the U.S. democracy is this notion of checks and balances. Yeah? The importance of relevance of the way the federation works. And despite the fact Mr. Trump may have X or Y vision, notion, intention, there are several institutions around, including the Congress, to really find a way to obtain the authorization for the implementation of X or Y. Traditionally, I think in general, in politics, we have this intention from the executive, and then the distance between this moment of announcing the intention to this moment of implementing that intention, by this moment, that intention is totally reviewed, redefined, re-elaborated, and quite a distance for what was the original intention. So, all to say that with the principle of federation, with the principles of checks and challenges, and the important relevance of institutional behaviors, Texas has a lot to do, certainly. Beginning with at the individual level, these conversations with our corresponding representatives, certainly, and also finding ways to articulate what is the best interest of these groups in Texas related to NAFTA, related to the wall, related to, and then creating a good, hopefully coordinating, eloquent, strategic Texas approach to be part of this debate and this conversation. we have the benefit and the privilege of these federal institutions, of these checks and balances, and the relevance of the federation in the way it's operating here in the United States. So I think there is plenty of room for Texas being participating in this process, but hey, we need to be intentional about it. Remember, Texas is the winner of NAFTA, I will say. So it's our best interest to remain as the winner of this U.S. Mexico trade connection and plus everything else, and to be smart enough for us to be presenting that agenda in an eloquent way. And in some instances, we may be in a situation that with a new generation of leaders, the new president, sometimes we need to be educating the new leaders in the new institution. And I think we, with degrees of, I would say, social and cultural humility, is presenting the case in such a way to invite Mr. Trump to be, as you say, more interested and motivated to understand the complexity and the sophistication of what implies this U.S.-Mexico relationship.
Rookie, who in Boston has the intelligence to figure it out? Is there anybody?
Ana Paula.
I just had a couple of questions for you, Rodolfo. One is, there's usually, there are many studies that actually say that when there's like an adverse sentiment against Mexicans in the U.S., then there's a little bit, like there's some reversion of immigration flows of people who go back to Mexico, which to the same point result in, towns of origin being less rich because of lack of remittances being sent from the U.S., which then again, results in more immigration back to the U.S., right? So, what would be your take on reverse migration in that sense?
Well, actually, that's already happening.
Yes.
We have people are moving in higher levels to Mexico than coming to, from Mexico to the United States. So I would say that in the way the Mexican economy is evolving and the way the democratic institutions in Mexico are maturing and becoming more solid in terms of democratic institutions, I think it becomes a very solid destination for Mexicans, especially for those Mexicans certainly living abroad, the ones living in the United States. But if for some reason Mexico is facing a period of uncertainty that even may imply a stage of recession, Mexicans will be looking for destination. And if the market supply demand is there for Mexicans to be in that labor market, they will go to that specific labor market. It could be United States, it could be Canada, or even, let's be more sophisticated, it could be some Asia, for instance, of even Europe. When you have a need, you look for the means. And if the labor market is there, they will be looking for that destination. That would be my approach.
Okay, I'm going to Dr. Baker, and then over here, and then Diego.
Thank you. Yes, Dr. Hernandez, I was interested, you mentioned very well what Mexico could do, to support and to work on this, who kind of have ideas about trade and with other countries. But I was wondering also what your thoughts are in terms of how Mexico could support Mexicans in the States, in the United States, who might, with this Trump government, feel rejected, but they're not the illegal ones, but the ones that have been living here might feel estranged of the U.S., but are also not Mexican anymore. So how could Mexico support this very large group of actual legal immigrants who are here and
absolutely
some kind of support?
Yes, and I will say that we have good news, because right now there is an immediate response from the Mexican federal government, and specifically from the Foreign Affairs Ministry, and the Vice Consul Victor Arriaga may elaborate more about it. But there is a specific guidance from the Mexican political leadership
to protect Mexicans in the United States. And there is a major mechanism of coordinating these efforts at the different consulates in collaboration with the corresponding communities and civic groups to enhance the access to this protection. And remember, that is one of the key pieces that Peña Nieto is bringing to the table. It's one of my objectives. He said it's my objective to protect connationals in the United States and to coordinate that protection with the U.S. government. And if for some reason repatriation will be in place, we are going to be working together. All right? And so, in principle, we are assuming that the respect of human rights and a strategic way for Mexico to welcome these Mexicans and for them to really ensure that they feel that they have a solid home destination in this process, if applicable. Vice Consul would like to say.
If appropriate, yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a very important point that really helps us understand the role that consulates play in the U.S. I mean, there are 50 consulates of Mexico in the United States. In 50 different cities of the U.S., we have official representation, and we've received a couple of clear mandates from the Mexican administration regarding, on the one hand, the issues you've addressed. I mean, what will happen to Mexicans who live in the United States who might suffer some kind of situation of discrimination or of abuse, and on the other hand, a program to welcome Mexicans who decide to return to Mexico either on a voluntary basis or who are repatriated due to some kind of a decision by the U.S. government. So we have a very clear mandate in the area of reaching out to the community. We've stressed the importance of the contact with the Mexican consulate whenever any situation such as this arise. And here, I mean, I should stress that we have very important local partners who are very key in terms of identifying situations of risk or identify situations of violation of rights or of abuse. And I mean, and I think that that's something that I really feel we're very privileged here in Dallas to have partners in the community that are very close to the consulate and help us identify these situations. And also, we've strengthened our program for welcoming back Mexicans who decide to return or who are deported for whatever reason.
I have a comment and then ask your opinion on it if I can. I think it's absolutely wonderful that Mexico now is experiencing a fairly healthy middle class, which is wonderful. And how is that going to be protected? Because you've come such a long way to develop that. In all of these negotiations, everything to protect that is so vital.
Well, I put in the best interest of Mexico, in terms even of the principle of sovereignty. What the national interest of Mexico is to maintain, to provide mechanisms and tools for society to remain in good standards of social development, cultural development, educational development, economic development. All these definitions in terms of what implies to have the dignity of human development. But that's part of the whole equation for what implies this regional approach. I always say, in the way I explain to my students, that I invited them to stop thinking about the U.S. approach, the Mexico approach, the Canadian approach. I think we have elements to be thinking about the North American approach, about the regional approach for what implies the daily routine of these three countries, and specifically Mexico and the United States. Whenever we want to discuss anything in terms of development in Mexico, I mean, we cannot do it without considering the United States. And I would say to a certain degree, it's happening the same way for U.S. with all this Mexican talent and presence here, and in terms of how is this close economic, cultural, social connection U.S.-Mexico. So the challenge is certainly, from the Mexican perspective, is what else we need to be doing and how proactive we have to be to visualize these scenarios that may come during the Trump's administration in terms of the U.S. Mexico relationship to recreate Mexico good enough to provide alternatives to Mexicans. All right? But let's not really assume that this is going to be unilateral coming from the top leadership to the bottom of the Mexican society. I also think that the way Mexicans are evolving and maturing in terms of being rational individuals, pursuing choices, and be competitive enough to be in the labor market, they will have sufficient motivation to find those opportunities and recreate those opportunities in a more entrepreneurial, with a more entrepreneurial approach. Okay, so it's a work and it's an approach that together, as a nation, at the highest level, at the lowest level, together we should be elaborating and embracing together to keep moving these individuals from the poverty line to the next level of human development.
Through education.
Education, yes.
Sorry,
yes.
I had to sort it through education.
Please.
How do we ensure that we continue to build our middle class in Mexico? Education. Our educational system is not where it used to be. So if we want to strengthen the individualism and the dreams and the capacity of people to aspire for more, Mexico has to reinvest in its educational system from K-12 to our higher education. That's as simple as that. What made America great. I can't believe I said that. Sorry, no
Very
pun
practical
intended.
point, yes.
It was education. The strong U.S. public education systems were fantastic. So sorry, I had to put my 2 cents in because I stand here. Deidre, please, and then Pat Patterson.
Thank you, Elisa. Thank you for your presentation. I want to go back to your comment around a lack of understanding of the complexity around the trade agreements. Fareed Zakaria was on CNN earlier this week, and he said it was unfortunate, and used that term, that the current administration had chosen to walk away from TPP. And he used that in reference to Mexico because he said part of the advantage to both the U.S. and Mexico was that Mexico had agreed to certain concessions around labor and environmental issues as part of being a part of TPP. Now that TPP is off the table, will the Mexican government, first off, what would be their incentive to consider that with a trilateral agreement as opposed to a multilateral agreement? And how will that affect the Mexican economy if they agree to those concessions purely as it relates to NAFTA as opposed to a multilateral agreement?
Well, I think it's going to be, the whole holistic conversation and negotiation in terms of trade. And by the fact that the TPP is not going to be there anymore, I think, including Mexico, may be looking for individual interactions with those specific countries. In other words, instead of this multilateral approach, it will be a bilateral approach, case by case. That may take additional energy and time, certainly, in the whole process, in the whole negotiation. But if that is the approach, which actually, for instance, Chile has announced that, hey, I'm not there anymore, and I will be pursuing that bilateral approach. I think Mexico has the capacity, because it has been gone through a major, amazing learning experience to be there, to be negotiating free trade agreements at this point. I think there's a lot of potential, and certainly with a strategic vision for what implies this interaction and these specific trades with these countries. Now, in terms of environment, in terms of labor, that has been quite, hot issues of NAFTA. And after these 20 years of marriage, hey, it's time to elaborate intellectual rights, for instance, and many other aspects that I really think that could put NAFTA in the next level for what could be a more strategic and more relevant competitiveness with respect to other global markets.
Pat, please.
A couple of things. One is when you say that we can, if eliminating NAFTA results in a recession in Mexico, there will be more immigration towards the United States. And we bring that up with Mr. Trump. Doesn't he just say, not with my wall? I mean, hasn't he anticipated that that's going to happen? Doesn't he think he has an answer for it? Secondly, what about the maquiladoras, where it's my understanding that certain pieces of equipment may go back and forth several times. Or, equipment may go back and forth several times.
9
with
times.
Finishing here and then, assembling there and then whatever and back again. Isn't that going to affect the U.S. automobile industry in a way that's going to be negative for the U.S. And drive up their costs.
Certainly, I'm with you. I think ultimately in both scenarios, first of all, I would like to say that in both scenarios we'll be creating higher prices for products and services for Mexico and for the United States. Now, certainly, if the wall is going to be there, we may assume that there is no way to come to the United States. But hey, creativity is in place, and I think in terms of the informal partnership between U.S. Mexico, I think we have been learning a lot about the engineering of building tunnels. Tunnels. And so I ought to say, I'm getting a little bit sarcastic right here, because the creativity of these humans looking for those means to really be in the labor market, a wall is a physical wall. If they really find a way to find those opportunities whenever the market is providing those opportunities. And in terms of maquiladoras, I think at some point we mentioned about the change supply management. So some portions are made here in the United States, and to Mexico or to Canada, they assemble over there, and the product comes back to the United States. So it's all to say is the sophistication of this trade, and hopefully together finding ways to the different debates and creating a good strategic agenda to be presented before the Congress, before representatives, for them to understand what implies this change supply chain management for the future and the sake of this NAFTA. Yes.
Other questions?
Yes.
Well, I just wanted to add a comment about NAFTA, because it is unfortunate that it's, that the way that the revision of NAFTA is being suggested as of now is because NAFTA was negotiating with very different lots. And so it's kind of like an all or nothing deal, and that's the hard part. I agree with Rodolfo in the sense that after 20 years of marriage, you probably have to go in and figure out if you're liking certain aspects of your marriage. But the thing is, in terms of negotiating that, if you reopen the whole agreement, it'll be a kind of worms. And it's not only it will affect consumers in both countries and the whole region in terms of higher prices, but it will also affect employment in the whole region, because 5 million jobs in the U.S. depend directly on NAFTA.
And that's why I asked the question about the economic reset. I'm not sure I got an answer to that, but that's exactly what Marie said. He said that his primary concern was, you're asking NAFTA to renegotiate what they've already negotiated.
Yes.
And they negotiated under the premise that they would be part of a multilateral agreement as opposed to a trilateral agreement. So the question I was asking was, one, that's not favorable for Mexico, obviously, and he was agreeing with that. He's not disagreeing that the reconsideration of NAFTA is prevalent. 23 years, you're right. What he was saying was, why ask them to renegotiate what they have already negotiated? It was a lack of this administration's understanding of what had already been agreed to in TPP. And then on the other piece of it, to what you're talking about, is the economic impact it will have on both sides of the border.
And the other thing is, Mexico is the country with more free trade agreements in the world. So that's not a problem for us. We have a very long tradition of, or experience in negotiating bilateral agreements with the world. But as far as being competitive economically, against the European Union, for example, which is also falling apart, or Asia, which is a big player right now, I think we will be stronger as Mexico and the U.S. and Canada as a region. And if we reopen NAFTA, then maybe not so.
And he addressed Asia as an important impact, because now that TPP is off the table, China is now coming into play as the predominant both security as well as economic player.
So all those old economy guys up in Ohio, etc., can go pick lemons.
What happened here?
All the unemployed economy of Ohio can now go pick lemons. Any other questions?
Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Questions? Well, then I will close. Thank you, Rodolfo, for this timely discussion. We appreciate it. I I believe in the back of your programs a list of upcoming events, or in the front of other Tower Center events. I hope you will consider joining us. If not, check our website for other opportunities to engage with the Tower Center. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Have a lovely day, and let's see what news comes from these very important meetings today.